Computer. Here we go. Fred from Hanukkah, everybody. So the story of Hanukkah. People, I'm assuming, are basically familiar with the general story. And as often happens, what happened is sometimes a little less clear than the way we think it happened. Um, so what I want to do is we're going to start off with the Talmud's record of Hanukkah, and then we're going to look at the way some of our later sages, specifically we're going to start with Maimonides, and how they analyzed and summarized and understood what occurred on Hanukkah. So we all are familiar with the basic story. The story of Hanukkah happened towards the end of the time of the Second Temple. And I'll share with you that it is unclear, it is undecided, it is somewhat disputed when precisely the story of Hanukkah occurred, which exact year. We know it was towards the end of the Second Temple. And just to share with you, sort of like a full disclosure, we all, of course, celebrate the great victory and the lighting of the menorah and how the oil lasted 8 days, but it didn't sustain for a long time. A little bit, there's a criticism that the Hashmonoim, we call them the Maccabees, so that's their family, they were Kohanim, and they seized the status of king as well, which was not in their purview. And there is a reprimand about that, because what are they doing that for? That's not their job. And it didn't last very long. And eventually, of course, the Second Temple was destroyed. So we're really celebrating a small window of time when the miracle of Hanukkah occurred. And as always, not only are we doing a deep dive of a legal or conceptual analysis of the events, we are always cognizant that Torah, the word itself, means instruction. And where can we find in our own lives and in our own circumstances that the message of Hanukkah continues to resonate? So, as a famous rabbi, meaning me, once said, before I speak, I like to say a few words. So, some background before we even get up to the story of Hanukkah. We remember that in broader history, Alexander the Great was out to conquer the world. And like most people who are out to conquer the world, they believe, or at least they portray themselves, as having some, I'll call it moral message or something that they are bringing to the world. They don't just perceive themselves as merely power hungry brutes, but they consider that they have some gift to give to the world that they are spreading. Well, what Alexander the Great believed that he had to give to the world was the Greek philosophy and scholarship and medicine and organized government and so on. And so, as he went through country after country, or there was probably more like tribal identities, he imposed that whole Greek system upon them. When he came to the land of Israel, this was obviously the time of the temple was stood. So the people were pretty concerned about this. So they sent the high priest in his full high priest regalia. His name was Shimon, the high priest. And he greeted Alexander the Great. And to the great shock of Alexander's troops, when Alexander saw him, he dismounted his horse as a sign of respect, and he prostrated himself in some form to Shimon the Tzaddik, Shimon the Kohen Gadol. And people were shocked, his people. What is this? Why are you showing this humility towards this person? And Alexander the Great, as the story goes, says that before he goes into battle, he's had a vision of a holy man who has come to him and assured him of victory. And this is the holy man that he saw. That's the story. So Alexander sees Israel and he says, hey, look, these people have civilization, they have scholarship, they have art and music and science and organized government. They're not just sort of barbarians out in the jungle of just living a undisciplined life. And so he says, hey, we can get along. And the people were pretty happy about that because they didn't want to be destroyed. And yet Alexander still had his ego. He still had his quest for some form of power. And so he declared that as a sign of reverence for him, they should erect a statue of him in the Holy Temple in the Beis Hamikdash. Well, as you all immediately would recognize, that is not going to fly. Well, that is not happening on our watch. But they're a little scary because if you say no, he could get angry, and you don't want to make him angry. So smart Jewish boichicles, they came up with an alternative plan. And they said, I'll tell you what, we'll do something even better. What's that? We will commit that every boy who is born for, I don't know, whatever period of time, a year, maybe it was more, we will name him Alexander. And that is how Alex or Sander or Sender or Sandy Koufax, everyone knows him, right? The most famous guy. That's how that became a Jewish name. It's not a biblical name like David or Moshe or Abraham, but it became incorporated, and he was satisfied with that. And things, went along pretty good. Now, unfortunately, just amongst us chickens, there were many Jews who weren't satisfied with just sort of keeping the Greeks at bay and doing Jewish things, but they really liked the whole idea of Greek culture and philosophy and way of life. And they started to become what is called misyavnim. Yavan is the Greek culture, and they were Yavanites. They became enchanted with and followers of the Greek way. Sometimes they're called Hellenists, named after Queen Helen, who was the empress or whatever it's called of Greece. And unfortunately, they started to not only practice this themselves, but they started to insist that all the Jews practice this. They became demanding that all the Jews should practice this Greek culture. And they started to pressure the Jews into doing so until it finally got to the point where we could no longer get along and we could no longer have this alliance and partnership. And the Greeks finally said, look, you have to affirm that our culture and way of life and language and music and food and practice, and of course, included in that, what it is that we worship, what it is that we aspire to, is superior to your way of doing things. And you have to become Greek, and so on. And they slaughtered a pig in the Beis Hamikdash until finally Matisyahu, the head of the Kohen Gadol family, rose up and said, whoever is for God, come to me. We came to a breaking point, and that led to the battle of the Maccabees, who were certainly not what we think of as skilled warriors, but they became that. And through literal miracles, because they were such a small group, and they were ethical. And in war, ethics is not a very helpful skill. Ethics gets you in trouble, and the bad guys are happy to hide in hospitals and kindergartens. And yet, miraculously, Hashem delivered the mighty nation into the hands of the Israelites. And then, just to finish the story, which you're familiar with, although we're going to really bore down and analyze every nuance and word, the Israelites regained control of the Beis Hamikdash and found that it had been desecrated. Now, when we say desecrated, we don't just mean vandalized. What we mean something in a way worse than vandalized. It had been co-opted by the Greeks for their idolatrous practice, which in a way is worse than just spray painting it and smashing things. And their first point of business was to light the menorah. And why that was the first point. Why did they? There's many things that we did. We burned incense. We did sacrifices. Why was lighting the menorah so immediately crucial? We'll talk about why that was the focus. And as you're familiar, they searched and they found plenty of oil. This is sometimes misunderstood. There was plenty of oil. The issue was that that oil for the menorah is required, although there could be a leniency, which we'll get to, that they could have taken advantage of, but they didn't, and we'll talk about that, hopefully, that the oil had to have been prepared under very specific ritual circumstances called the laws of Tahara, often translated as pure. And the way in which it maintained that purity was that it was sealed by a Kohen. That was one of the obligations of a Kohen. and they could not find one that the seal was still intact. The Greeks had not smashed the oil, they had not destroyed the oil. This is important. Sometimes it's misunderstood. There was plenty of oil, but the oil had been desecrated. They broke the seals. They didn't smash the oil. There was plenty of oil. The oil had been desecrated. But they looked and looked. And again, we'll talk about why this was so meaningful to them and so crucial. Even though there could have been a leniency in this circumstance that they could have used the impure oil. And they found one single cruse of oil, which was sealed. And it was sealed, curiously, by the high priest, which was not necessarily a requirement that the high priest do it. You know, in the priestly class, there was one captain, one leader, Aaron, of course, the original one, and every time there was a hierarchy. He was like the president of the Kohanes. That was not specifically his responsibility. He could do it, but any Kohen could do it. And the one that they found was sealed by the high priest. They, of course, it had enough for one day, and it miraculously lasted for 8 days, which itself is a whole curious discussion. Why do we have 8 days of Hanukkah? The first day it wasn't a miracle. There was enough for the first day. It's only the second day that it lasted that it became a miracle, and so on. And a year later, and that's important as well, we'll hopefully dig down into each of these nuances, they established this holiday with the recitation of Hallel and the thanksgiving to Hashem. And whether there's an obligation on Hanukkah to not only do the prayers and light the candles, but what about having a festive meal? Is that an obligation on Hanukkah as well? We all love sufganiyot and latkes, but is there any obligation to have a festive meal on Hanukkah, or is it only about lighting the menorah? Now, as I mentioned, we're always looking for what is the personal takeaway? Where do we find the message of Hanukkah in our own lives? Because like in the second blessing, we say when we light the menorah, after we say the bracha for lahadlik ner Hanukkah, to light the candles of Hanukkah, we recount she'asa nisim, that God made miracles, lavosena, to our forefathers, bayami mahem, in those days, and bisman hazeh, at this time. Now, there's a little bit of a play on that phrase. Bisman hazeh, this time, means this time of year, because it happened to our ancestors 2,000 plus years ago at this season. And it also means in those days and in these days that we are living Hanukkah at every moment. And I think we could venture out, or I will venture out, and feel free to jump in if you think this is on track or off track, that the university system in America, which is the modern day iteration of the Greeks with scholarship and academics and philosophy and so on, and clearly the fraternity system and a lot of Greek culture is found today in our modern world in the university system. And when the Jews first came to this country, en masse, in the early part of the 1900s, it was a great aspiration to be able to go to university. Unfortunately, what sometimes happens is we don't just go to university to get an education so that we can have a profession to generate income to serve Hashem. We start to become a little enamored with the educational system, with the Ivy League. What is more Jewish than sending your little boichikol off to university? And it's not innately a bad thing conceptually, but what can happen is, like what happened to the Jews, we're not just getting along, we're going along. We're not just saying, okay, this is something that we can utilize so that we get an education to have a profession and a job and money, etc., in order to buy tefillin and Shabbos and Yontif and live a life. We started a little bit, not us, of course, because we're perfect, but we started to become a little too enamored to the point that it became like a Jewish thing. Harvard University, they used to call it. And we went from being sort of tolerated, well, you Jewish guys are smart and so on, but you sit in the corner and just know that you don't belong here, like with the blue bloods from Connecticut, and you're here because we tolerate you, and yes, you can participate, but just know your place. To becoming the presidents of the universities. And now, what we have witnessed over the last 2 years, today, the pro-Palestinian rioters declared death to Israel as they occupied the Rabinowitz dining room, the Goldberg dormitory, the Cohen laboratory. What happened? What happened? How did this happen? How did this institution, which we dominated, right? There was nothing more Jewish than going to the Ivy League, suddenly turn on us so drastically in 1 minute. Well, this must have been the way the Jews experienced it in the times of Hanukkah. I thought we're buddies and we got along just fine. And we supported you materially and with our best kids. We sent our best kids. So what's the pushback? The pushback has to be purity. We have to bring godliness. We have to remember that our mission is to bring light into the world. Yes, it's a great value that Jewish people excel in the academics so that they can make the world a more godly place. But our mission is to be the light and bring that light into the world. And the only way to do that is with the not just olive oil, but with the pure olive oil. But there's nothing under a microscope that distinguishes the quote pure olive oil from the olive oil that was cracked open by a Greek. There's nothing you can see under the microscope that separates A from B. They look exactly the same. Their properties are exactly the same. Yet, one brings purity and light that dispels the darkness, and the other only sustains this message about how it serves me. So, this is the sort of overarching. And then, as we often do, we really start to drill down and analyze each phrase and each word and each statement so that we can really get a deeper understanding. So, where do we start? Unlike Purim, we don't have a book. I mean, there was a book written of Megillus Antiochus, who was the name of the Greek emperor, but it's not canonized in our scripture. Remember, historically, Hanukkah happened about 500 years or so, well, less maybe, after Purim. Purim happened between temples 1 and 2, and Hanukkah happened at the end of the second temple, so 400 years later, whatever it was. But we don't have a book of scripture that is the authoritative text of Hanukkah. So yeah.
So wasn't the second temple destruction the Romans and the first the Greeks or Babylonians, right?
Well, the Romans overtook the Greeks. You know, they were the next big kid to come down the block.
So the destruction of the temple.
No, the Greeks don't destroy the temple. They just occupy temporarily, and then we regain control.
So it's between the first and second.
What is it? What when we say it? That's Purim is between the first and second temples.
So tell me again when Hanukkah.
The end of the second temple, not the very end. You know, towards this during the second temple.
Okay, so it was just it wasn't the destruction.
Right, it was an
defacement and occupation.
Correct, and when we say defacement, but it was an occupation. I mean, they didn't just go in and spray paint it and smash it up. They went in and tried to co-opt it.
So it was able to be restored to its
correct
first Beis Hamikdash status.
Second Beis Hamikdash. Its original Beis Hamikdash status, yeah. Okay, so where do we find it? We find it in the Talmud. Now, there is not a volume of Talmud that is dedicated to Hanukkah. And we often use Hanukkah and Purim. They're like twins because they're both rabbinic and post the 5 books and have a lot of common law, which we'll talk about. So there's a whole volume of Talmud that speaks about the laws of Purim. It's called Megillah, named primarily for the book that we read, which actually Megillah just means the book. It's Megillus Esther, but that's a Purim story. We don't have a volume of Talmud that is dedicated to Hanukkah. Where do we find the laws of Hanukkah? It's in the volume about Shabbos. What is the connection to Shabbos? So in the second chapter of the volume about Shabbos, it speaks about the laws of Shabbos candles. Well, we make a little bit of a dominoes, you match up Shabbos candles leads you to Hanukkah candles, and we get into the laws of Hanukkah candles. And just for curiosity, it's in the middle of the whole discussion about what kind of candles you should use and what they should be made of, and can they be made of paraffin and oil and so on, that the Talmud a little bit sort of parachutes in the middle of the discussion with the piece that is up on the screen now. So again, I'm going to try to analyze every word and nuance. Unfortunately, we have the great assistance of the English translation. That, of course, makes it available to us. The downside is the translation is also a commentary, because when you're translating, you're deciding what exactly the words mean. So I want to start first on the Hebrew side, just for the first two words. The first two words of this discussion, and again, obviously there's no question mark or colon or even vowels in the original Talmud. So by putting those in, you're also making a statement. The Talmud asks, or it states, my Chanukah. Now, he translates it here, and it's a legitimate translation. This is from Rabbi Aiden Steinsaltz. He translates it as, what is Hanukkah? See, the bold face is the direct translation, and the lighter face is the sort of commentary. So he's translating it as, what is Hanukkah? But that itself is a point of discussion. The word my, if you just ask me, what does the word my mean? It means why. Why Hanukkah? He's translating it as what? Now, this is not just a semantic dispute, although we're certainly not anti-semantic. And we do that kind of thing commonly because we're really trying to dig down. There is a question as to what is the Gemara's question. What is it that they are hoping to achieve? Now, I'm going to scroll down here. Hopefully, you can still see it. This is the Rashi comment. Now, here, it's only in the Hebrew. Rashi quotes this statement from the Talmud, my Chanukah, which, again, most literally would be translated as why Chanukah? Why do we have Chanukah? And Rashi says that what the Gemara is trying to establish is al eza nes kavua. For which miracle did we establish the holiday of Hanukkah? Which miracle? Now, that means that there's a choice. There's a choice. Nobody asks, why do we have Passover? Because we know why. It was a miracle that we left Egypt. Rashi is saying that the Gemara is asking a question, what miracle prompted us to have the holiday of Hanukkah? So let's see. So he translates it here. Again, when you look in the translation, you got to have an open mind. This is a way of reading it, but not everybody reads it this way. So Rabbi Steinsaltz translates this as, what is Hanukkah and why are lights kindled on Hanukkah? Meaning, why are lights kindled and what is Hanukkah? As if it's two separate questions. Here we go. The Gemara answers, the sages taught in Megillus Tainus on the 25th of Kislev, which is what we call the first day of Hanukkah. The days of Hanukkah are 8, right? That's when it begins, and it begins on the 25th of Kislev, which itself is an interesting question. I'm just going to throw this out right now. Does the war end on the 24th and the 25th is the first day of peace when they find the oil? Or does the war end on the 25th? And then they start to create that as day one, which we'll get to, hopefully, if I stop talking. What is the reason? When the Greeks entered the sanctuary, they defiled all the oils. Remember, we mentioned there was plenty of oil. It was just defiled spiritually. But there was nothing that you could see under a microscope that looked any different about it. It was perfectly useful oil, just like the oil we buy today and we fry our latkes in. That's what this oil was like. They didn't put pig in it. They didn't spit on it. It was the same oil biochemically as the oil we're frying our latkes in. But it had not been prepared under the strict, super rational, that is, there's no explanation. Why is it that if a Kohen prepares it, it's tahor, it's pure and usable, and if somebody who's tamei, even a Jew or a Gentile, breaks the seal, it's not. There's nothing you can see. There's nothing you can measure about it. And when the Hasmonean, that's the Maccabees, monarchy, and again it describes them here as the kings, and that was a little bit of a problem because they were Kohanes. They weren't supposed to be kings, but we're not going to harp on that now. Overcame them and emerged victorious over them. They searched and found only one cruse of oil that was placed with the seal of the high priest undisturbed by the Greeks. So again, there was plenty of oil, it just wasn't sealed. And there was sufficient oil there to be lit the candelabrum, the menorah, for only one day. A miracle occurred, and they lit the candelabrum from it 8 days. The next year, and again, why the next year? The sages instituted those days and made them holidays with recitation of Hallel and special thanksgiving in prayer and blessing. So that's the special prayers that we say, Ala Nisim, where we thank God for the miracles. And of course, we recite the Hallel, which is not unique to Hanukkah. We say it on Sukkot and Pesach and Rosh Chodesh, etc. Although not on Purim, because Purim happened outside of Israel. It wasn't a total victory because we're still living in someone else's land. So we'll get there. Okay, this is the Talmud. So this is baseline. I don't want to say you can't, but basically you can't disagree with the Talmud, but you can disagree about what the Talmud means. So remember, if I were to ask you what is the objective of this paragraph of the Talmud, Rashi says, and again, we take Rashi very seriously. Nobody doesn't, but doesn't mean that other great sages can't have a different interpretation. I'm not going to have a different interpretation, just like I'm not arguing with an expert, but other experts can argue with experts. So Rashi says that it means the Gemara's question is, for which miracle did we establish the holiday of Hanukkah? And what would you say the answer is? Which miracle? Anybody? Somebody? Is this on? The oil that lasted 8 days. Very good. What miracle do we have Hanukkah for? The oil lasted 8 days. That is the Rashi interpretation. You with me? Okay. So now the Talmud is written about 2,000 years ago, about 900 years ago. There lived one of our greatest sages. That's around the same time Rashi lived approximately, known as Moshe, the son of Maimonides, or Rambam. Rambam was born in Spain and in Toledo. He had to flee. And curiously, I mean, just to be awed by him, he fled in his teens, like the best years of your scholarship. And he wound up in Egypt, ironically, where he became a consultant to the medical doctor, to the Sultan. That's one of the reasons why we name hospitals after him specifically. And one of our historically great sages, he's buried in Tiberia. He wrote the Guide to the Perplexed, which is what we would call a philosophical writing. He wrote a commentary on the Mishnah. He listed out what are each of the 613 mitzvahs, which, again, we're all familiar that there are 613 mitzvahs, but what exactly qualifies as its own mitzvah, as opposed to being a subset of some other mitzvah? For example, Shabbos is only a few mitzvahs, but many laws, and many of the mitzvahs, in fact, the overwhelming majority of them are only relevant in temple times, and so on. And I get a chance to say this, so I'm excited, his magnum opus. Magnum opus sounds like a puppet, but magnum opus means his greatest work is his 14 volumes, where he gives you, as he describes it, just the law, the cold, hard steel. He's not giving you philosophy. He's not giving you Jewish history. He doesn't even quote his source. He simply tells you that if you will read the 24 books of Tanakh and his 14 volumes, you will know what to do. Now, some sages were like, who does this guy think he is telling? But he doesn't mean that you shouldn't study the Talmud. He's just saying it's not required for you to study the Talmud in order for you to know what to do, when to stand up and when to sit down, and what to do if you put chicken soup in a cereal bowl, whatever it is. So he's very, very bold in his description and absolutely comprehensive. Just to fill that in, about 40 years ago, the Rebbe began a program which continues to this day, that every day we study 3 chapters of this writing, and in a little bit less than a year, in about 50 weeks, you finish the whole 14 volumes. So we've been doing this for 40 years, and it takes a little bit less than a year, so we've probably done it about 45 times. We're actually pretty close to the end of the cycle. And so we look to Maimonides, what are the rules for how we implement it? Now, again, I'm not going to argue with Maimonides because I'm not that bold, but there are great authorities, contemporaries of his, who did argue with him. So not everything that it says in Maimonides' code of law, it's called the Mishnah Torah, the summary of Torah, do we follow in practice. In particular, that we are Ashkenaz and Maimonides was Sfard. So there are certain Ashkenaz Sfard practices that differ. So we're going to look now in Maimonides. So hopefully this will come up on the screen. Do you see this on the screen where it says here, Megillah v'Chanukah, chapter 2? You see that? Okay.
Yes.
Now, Maimonides, every word that he wrote is absolutely precise. Absolutely. And it's really, really important that we look at every word that he writes because he understood the gravity of his audacity to set out on this project. And so, again, he's also obviously brilliant, genius, and divinely driven. So his every word is to be studied. Now, the first thing we're going to look at is how Maimonides reorganized all of Torah. And again, it's really remarkable in his genius. So Maimonides, again, he sets out and he addresses every law in Torah, just the laws. He's not here to tell you the stories and the philosophy and so just the cold hard steel. So he doesn't open up the Talmud and go through, okay, page 2 as this. He reworked the whole masterpiece, reorganized everything. So as an example, just a random example, the laws of Passover are in one book, which is the laws of holidays, and the laws of the Passover sacrifice are in a different book, in the laws of sacrifices, even though you'll find them in the same volume of Talmud, because the theme is different. So the laws of Hanukkah are to be found in the laws of time-oriented holidays. So the laws of the shofar, the laws of the lulav. And he pairs them with the laws associated with the holiday of Purim, because they have a lot of overlap. So he doesn't want to repeat himself. So if he said it about the laws of Purim, he may say Hanukkah is the same, and he sort of expects you to know. So the first thing we're going to look at is, what does Maimonides title these laws? And you look here, he titles them the laws of Megillah, v'Chanukah, and Hanukkah. Now this should catch your attention. Your antennae should go up, and you should have a very important question. I'll wait here all day. What's the question? Come on, people. You're on mute. You have to unmute if you want to share. Why does this strike you as odd? What is the name of the laws of Purim that Maimonides is referencing here? What is he calling it? You got to unmute because I can't hear you. Anybody? Somebody? I just highlighted it. Are you paying attention?
Megillah.
What's that?
Megillah?
Hey, thank you, Jay. Thank you. You get extra recess. Now, why does he call it the laws of Megillah? Why doesn't he call it the laws of Purim? Anybody want to venture a guess? Remember, what is Maimonides' ethos? What is the purpose of this writing? Say that again.
Laws.
The laws. So Purim is not a law. Megillah is the law, the rules. For example, you will not find the laws of Rosh Hashanah. What do you think he calls the laws of Rosh Hashanah? Come on, you think a little. Come on, people. Shofar, exactly. He doesn't call it the laws of Sukkot. He calls it the laws of Sukkah and the Lulav. He doesn't call it the laws of Pesach. He calls it the laws of Chametz and Matzah, because he's about law. So if you didn't look at the screen, and I told you Maimonides was going to give you the laws for this holiday, what might you anticipate he would have called it? The laws of menorah, right? Because that's the prime mitzvah. But he doesn't call it that. Latkes would have been a good guess too. What does he call it? The laws of Hanukkah. Now that is not an accident. Why does he call it the laws of Hanukkah? Seemingly, he should have called it the laws of the menorah. You got the question? You with me, folks? Okay, so let's follow along. Keep that in mind. And when I'm not going to tell you the answer, you're going to tell me the answer. Here we go. So here we go. In the era of the Second Temple, it's on the screen, right? The Greek kingdom issued decrees against the Jewish people, attempting to nullify their faith, as we talked about, refusing to allow them to observe the Torah and its commandments. They extended their hands against their property. That's parenthetically why we give Chanukah gelt. I know it's become presents. That's a little bit goyish. I don't know if it's the worst thing ever. But really the origin of Chanukah gelt is because the Greeks took our money. So we give money and we do it that way. Okay. And their daughters. And that's one of the reasons why women are 100% obligated in lighting the menorah, even though it's a time-oriented mitzvah. And the rule of thumb is that women are exempt from time-oriented mitzvahs like tefillin and tzitzis and so on. They entered the sanctuary, wrought havoc within, and made the holy articles impure. Okay? The Jews suffered great difficulties from them, for they oppressed them greatly until the God of our ancestors had mercy upon them, delivered them from their hand, and saved them. The sons of the Hasmoneans, the high priests. Now remember how they were referred to in the Talmud? What do we call the Hasmoneans in the Talmud? I'll go back and show you. What do they call the Hasmoneans? Here, what do they call them? The kings. Maimonides here refers to them as the high priests. And remember, I mentioned that was a little bit of a no-no, that they overstepped their bounds. Overcame them, slew them, and saved the Jews from their hand. They appointed a king from the priests. See, that sort of thing. That was a little bit of a problem. And sovereignty returned to Israel for more than 200 years until the destruction of the second temple, as we talked about. Okay? So now, I'm going to read one more. When the Jews overcame their enemies and destroyed them, they entered the sanctuary. This was on the 25th of Kislev. Now, that's a definitive statement Maimonides is making. We'll talk about that, I hope. They could not find any pure oil in the sanctuary with the exception of a single cruse. It contained enough oil to burn for merely one day. They lit arrangements of candles from it for 8 days until they could crush olives and produce pure oil. That's what happened after 8 days. They were able to make new oil in Tekoa. I happen to have been in Israel one year on Chanukah, and it's not only that they had to travel, it's the end of the season. I mean, it's wintertime. This is not the olive oil season. That's one of the issues that went on. Okay. Now I have a basic question for you that you are going to tell me. Remember I mentioned, what is Maimonides' stated purpose in writing this book? What is his purpose in writing the book? Somebody please tell me. Unmute and tell me. You got to unmute. You're wasting your own time here. Come on,
Law.
folks. The laws, right? And what law have we read in these first two paragraphs? Don't look so closely. What law have we read? No,
Don't think any.
That's correct, Jay Lampel. Thank you very much. We have not read even one law. What have we gotten? We've gotten a story. I thought Maimonides is not into telling stories. Why is Maimonides telling us the story? Anyone want to venture a guess? Remember what Maimonides said? That all you have to do, like as if it's the small feet, but the only thing that is required is read the 24 books of the Tanakh and his book, and you'll know all of Torah. Why is he telling us this story? He doesn't tell us the Purim story or the Pesach story or the Sukkah story. Why is he telling us the story?
It's beyond the Tanakh.
That's correct, because otherwise you'd never know the story. It's not in Tanakh, right? Would you know the story of Purim? Right, it's one of the books, but there is no book. That's one very good and important answer. What else? Remember I told you, according to the Rashi interpretation of the Talmud, why do we have Hanukkah? According to Rashi's interpretation of the Talmud that we learned. Jay, you're on mute. You got to unmute. Anybody? Why do we have Hanukkah? Well, what did Rashi tell us? Somebody? Anybody? Remember, what did we read? Here's the Talmud. What did we do? The miracle occurred. What was the miracle? It lasted for 8 days. According to Rashi, remember Rashi asked, well, Rashi interpreted that the Talmud's question was, why do we have Hanukkah? Answer, according to Rashi, because the oil lasted 8 days. According to what we read here in these two paragraphs from Maimonides, what would you deduce as to why we have Hanukkah and what we read here?
Military victory.
The military victory and 8 days of oil, right? He writes both. Now, Maimonides, smart Jewish boy that he was, when he is titling this series of laws, what did we anticipate he would title them? The laws of, you said it before, Steve. What did you, the menorah. But what does the menorah commemorate? Come on.
8 days.
8 days.
Say
Oil.
again.
The
The
8
oil,
days.
the miracle of the oil,
Oil.
right. But there's another miracle. What's the other miracle? The God of our ancestors had mercy. What was the other miracle that happened?
Well, no, that they found the oil.
Okay, good. And another miracle, an earlier miracle before that?
Overcoming the enemy.
They won the war. So here we find a great friction between two camps. And it continues to this day in a manner that's so striking. Which was more obviously miraculous, that they won the war or that the oil lasted 8 days? Which was more obviously miraculous? Which was something that you could never imagine would happen in the laws of nature? The oil lasting 8 days or winning the war?
Oil.
The oil lasting 8 days, right? 1 day oil can't last 8 days.
But you can't have one without the other.
Oh, a second, slow down. Good, good. Hold that thought. Which was more beneficial, that they won the war or that the oil lasted 8 days? Won the war. Without winning the war, who cares about the oil? We're all dead. So we got two miracles happening on Hanukkah, two separate miracles. One miracle is that we won the war. Was that absolutely a miracle? Or sometimes the little engine that could beats the big engine. Sometimes David beats Goliath. Sometimes the underdog wins the game. And there's still death, right? It's not like on the story of Purim where there were no Jewish casualties. People died. The war goes on. I mean, again, I have never been in war. I don't want to have any sense of stolen valor, but war is hell. I mean, it's not good. No such thing as a good war. But still, they won. I mean, again, as we read, the many were defeated by the few. The mighty were defeated by the weak. The immoral were defeated by the moral. And that's hard because in war, the immoral's got a great advantage because you don't care. The immoral has got great advantage. So, which is more beneficial to us as people? The war. Which is more overtly miraculous? The oil. Hold that thought. Hold that thought. I want to keep reading Maimonides. Accordingly, this is Maimonides, after he summarizes the two miracles, the sages of that generation ordained that these 8 days, which begin from the 25th of Kislev, that's the first day, should be commemorated. And what should they be commemorated? I'm going to go back to the Talmud. What did the Talmud say they should be? Hello? Look here. You see what I highlighted? Holidays, Hallel, Thanksgiving, and prayer, right? Look what Maimonides says. Something a little different, but not because he wasn't paying attention. He says days of happiness. Didn't say happiness. And again, that's not just some sort of amorphous thing. Look what it says. An acknowledgement of God's miracle in a material context in appreciation of the military victories. According to Rashi's reading for sure of the Talmud, the only reason we made a holiday is for the miracle of the oil. You know, I'll share with you a little Jewish cynical analysis. Even after the story of Purim, they wanted to make the holiday of Purim, of course, as we know. But there was some pushback. And you know what the pushback was? We've seen this before. In every generation, they rise up and try to kill us, and God saves us. We had Amalek in the Torah. We had Amalek in the time of King Saul with Samuel. So big deal. So Haman came along and tried to kill us. There were those, I'm talking about in the story of Purim, who pushed back and said, why are you making it a holiday? Because Haman tried to kill us. We know that. That's what happens every day. And God makes a miracle. Now, of course, we did choose to make it. And of course, we have the holiday of Purim. But that's the idea. So Hanukkah, the question is, what is it that prompted the establishment of Hanukkah? Was it the war or was it the oil? Now, again, as I emphasized, What does Rashi say? What prompted us to make it a holiday is the miracle of the oil. According to Maimonides, what prompted us to make it a holiday? Both factors. And how does Maimonides indicate that in his titling of these laws? He calls them the laws of Chanukah, not the laws of the menorah. Because of the laws of the menorah, the whole emphasis, certainly a greater emphasis, would be on the oil. And, it's like playing favorites. And therefore, Maimonides, not only does he retell the story, but by retelling the story, he's telling you what we're celebrating. And they're two separate rules. Law 1 is the story of the war. Law 2 is the story of the oil. Now, let's imagine the counterfactual. Imagine they win the war, they come back, and they don't find oil. They find the oil. It lasts one day. Look, they didn't do a lot of stuff, right? They didn't do the sacrifices. They had to clean up the temple. They couldn't go to work that moment. So let's imagine that they don't find the oil. They find the oil, and it only lasts one day. Do we still have a holiday? According to Rashi, would we still have a holiday?
Yes, because it's both.
According to Rashi in the Talmud,
Oh,
no.
because it's the oil.
Because according to Maimonides, we'd have a one-day holiday. We'd have the one day like we have for Purim. We'd have a one-day holiday to commemorate how we recaptured the temple and reestablished our authority over the temple. According to the Rashi interpretation of the Talmud, we might say no, there wouldn't even have been a holiday. And Maimonides underscores this by titling it the laws of Chanukah. And again, if you titled it the laws of the menorah, you'd be playing favorites by putting the emphasis on the laws, on the miracle of the oil. Now, as I mentioned, they established the holiday, going back to the Talmud here, a year later. Why the next year? Why the next year? And we want to venture a guess why the next year? Because you didn't know you had the miracle until it was over, right? You didn't know you have a miracle until it's over, right?
Maybe you had the miracle of oil at the time.
No, not because you light it the first day. You don't know it's a miracle. And then the second,
Okay, so the 8th day, but that's still
right, but you
more
can't,
than a year.
no, well, I'm saying you can't establish, okay, now let's make the holiday. We got to wait a year to commemorate. I mean, you don't know to make the 25th.
No, but on the 8th day, you know you've had an oil miracle.
Correct. But can you start celebrating it that day?
Oh, because you're still at war, so you...
No, because you don't know. Is it going to be 9 days, 10 days, 11 days?
Well, but after the 8th day, I assume that the flame went out.
Correct. But now you had new oil made, and now you can't say, okay, when are we going to celebrate the holiday? Today? Now the third day of the next month? No, you got to wait till next year to commemorate it. But according to the Maimonides, that the primary celebration, or at least a equal partner, I shouldn't say primary, equal partner of celebration is the war. Why do you think they waited a year? This is just a military concept, not a
Make sure they didn't come back.
Exactly. Make sure they don't come back. Meaning it's not like they signed an armistice and the Greeks officially surrendered. Okay? Steve, tell everybody what you're looking at because it leads perfectly into that, just like we rehearsed it.
I'm looking at the insert in the Amida to see what we're saying thanks for.
And what does it say? That's like we rehearsed it.
Okay, should I just read the whole thing?
You can read the whole thing or
Okay.
you can read the summary of it.
In the days of Matan, the son of Yochanan the high priest, the Hasmonean, and his sons, when the wicked Hellenic government rose up against your people Israel to make them forget your Torah and violate the decrees of your will, but you, in your abounding mercy, stood by them. In the time of their distress, you waged their battles, defended their rights, avenged the wrong done to them. You delivered the mighty into the hands of the weak, the many into the hands of the few, the impure into the hands of the pure.
Stop right there just for a moment. What miracle are we talking about?
The war.
The war only. Keep going.
The wicked into the hands of the righteous, and the wanton sinners into the hands of those who occupy themselves with your Torah. You made a great and holy name for yourself in your world and effected a great deliverance and redemption for your people Israel on this very day. Then your children entered the shrine of your house, cleansed your temple, purified your sanctuary, kindled lights in your holy courtyards, and instituted these 8 days of Chanukah to give thanks and praise for your great name.
So what's missing? What is not mentioned there?
That the oil lasted.
The oil. It doesn't mention the oil at all. It just says lights. It's not talking about the menorah. They didn't light the menorah in the courtyards. It's not plural. They don't mention it at all. Why? Because if you mention one, you mention the other. Now it's a competition. Now, when do we celebrate the miracle of the oil? What part of the day do we celebrate that?
In the evening.
When we light the menorah. So we separate them. It's like your children, right? You love this child, you love this child. It's not a competition. And again, you can imagine the argument. Oil. Without the war, we're all dead.
Is that why at Marav you do the davening before you light the menorah? Because you say that.
Doesn't have to be, but it's why we keep them separate. We keep them separate. You're talking about the war. The war is not such a miracle. Look, people died, and if somebody, God forbid, 1,000, we talk about the 6-day war. We talk about Yom Kippur War. It's a miracle. You know what? For the people whose brother or husband or father died, it's a little harder for them to see the miracle. They see it in the broader sense, but not in the personal sense. So the war, that's not such a miracle. The oil is a miracle. Yeah, the oil. Without the war, we're all dead. So you can see the argument. So we don't argue about it. Here we celebrate the war when we talk about the Ala Nisim and the benching and in the davening. And when we light the menorah, we celebrate the oil. We keep them a little separate. Now, again, remember I mentioned, and every time we want to talk about the contemporary application. It's been a big buzz, probably for a few years, but certainly for the last 2+, about whether you can be opposed to Israel and not be opposed to the Jewish people. That's a big claim. I have nothing against Jews. I just don't like Israel. So I always prompts me to say, well, what do you think about Finland? Oh, I don't know anything about Finland. Why don't you know anything about Finland? Well, the Jews are occupied. What about China's occupied Taiwan and Greece and Albania and how many Arabs are killed in Arab countries? They don't know anything. But it's about Israel. Like, I'm an international expert on all matters and so on. You don't even know who the mayor of your own city is and who the governor of Idaho is. Okay, but that's a separate story. We know, I think, I'm going to say broadly, intuitively, that that's a crock. But it seems like a reasonable thing. What, you support every single thing Israel does? They raised the speed limit? That's nonsense. So the world tries to separate out the oil from the war, the sort of conceptual idea of sanctity from the pragmatic side. Now, again, I don't support every move that Israel does, but I don't know every move that Canada does. And I don't know if I support every move that America does. But this idea that they're going to sort of separate them out as if they're two independent streams is the same thing. We don't dislike Jews. We just don't like Jewish practice. I mean, that was the story of Purim. Haman said, you guys are weird. We said, we won't be weird anymore. We won't be weird. We'll be normal. They said, well, I just hate you anyway. This is what happened with the Yisvetskia, the Jewish communists. In the 1920s, the Jews who came to the Communist Party in Russia, they said, we're the good Jews. We're not like those weirdos. They're the weird Jews. We're the good Jews. We'll help you get rid of the weird Jews. And they helped get rid of the weird Jews. And then they said, see, we're buddies, right? And they said, you know what? We just hate you anyway. And this is what happened. We got along with the Greeks. Everything was peachy keen, and we're academic. And we cut our hair like them. We dress like them. We talk like them, and we hang out like them. And we're buddies. And then they said, you know what? We just hate you anyway. We thought we hated you because you were weird. Now we just realized we just hate you. The haters, not everybody. The haters hate you because they hate you. Like we say, one thing about anti-Semitism, it's not the Jews' fault. That's the one thing. It's not the Jews' fault. So this idea that we can somehow put them in separate silos, which we sort of are struggling with, but ultimately it's an overlap. We tend to talk about that Purim was more like the Holocaust, where they just try to kill Jews regardless. But even then, if the Jews would have capitulated, maybe they could have been saved. But then they won't. And we say, well, on Hanukkah is more like the Inquisition, where they didn't like Judaism. But then they realize, you know what? It's not Judaism we don't like. We just don't like you. That's it. We just don't like you. And if you're not going to capitulate and say that we're good and you're bad and we're smart and you're dumb and we're right and you're wrong, then we're going to kill you. And then they don't. And again, as we know, the more they oppress us, the more resilient we become, which is one of the great metaphors of the olive oil. The more you crush it, the more it exudes the holiness. And, tragically, this gets borne out time and time again. The more you punch us in the nose, the more devoted we become to godliness. The more you oppress us, the more committed we become. The more you crush us, the more the olive oil comes out. Just to add with one small note, which is what we're all familiar with, in the Talmud, it describes the obligation of lighting the menorah. And let me see if I can just quickly scroll through it. Where it talks about here, it actually starts to talk about some of the obligations if a person bumped into a menorah and it went on fire, and so on and so forth. Just trying to find the one that I'm talking about, which is about adding candles to the menorah. Let me see if I can find it. I'm not so good at finding stuff right away. Talk amongst yourselves for a moment. No, I passed it. Hold on. Sorry, hold on a second. Let me go back. Okay, here it is. The sages taught in a brisa. A brisa was in the era before the Talmud, before the Gemara, which is the analysis of the Mishnah. The basic mitzvah of Hanukkah is each day to have a light, single light, kindled by a person, the head of the household, for himself and his household. So if you light literally one candle every day of Hanukkah, you have done the mitzvah, baseline mitzvah. The Mahadrin, those who are meticulous in the performance of mitzvahs, kindle a light for each and every one in the household. So if you have 5 people in your household, you'd light 5 candles total every night. First night, second night, third night, fourth night, every single night. And then, and you say, well, that's so weird. We all know that you add. That is called the Mahadra Mina Mahadran. This is like super duper. Like, oh my goodness, this is like the most super thing. And yet this is the common practice. So they adjust the number of lights daily. Now, there's an interesting dispute that you can read here that Beit Shammai says that on the first night you should light 8 candles, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Hillel says, which we are all familiar with because that's the law, you light 1 candle, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now that it's the common practice, right? Imagine everybody's familiar with this, quote unquote. Everybody knows that. So it's a beautiful thing about the Jewish people. This is not a mitzvah in the Torah. This is not a commandment, and yet the common practice is that we add a candle this is like across the board, everybody, quote unquote, does that. Anybody who lights Hanukkah candles says it's the 4th night, we light 4 candles. Now, why is that? What is the concept there? Well, one very simple interpretation is, if you have one day oil that lasts 2 days, is that a miracle? If it lasted for 2 days, would we call that a miracle? Yes, because it's one day oil lasted 2 days. If it lasts 3 days, is that a miracle? Yes. And it's a bigger miracle. 4, 5. So every day the miracle got greater. So that's what Hill's saying. The miracle on day 5 is a bigger miracle than on day 2. He goes, one day oil lasts 2 days. Okay, we all have it, the old joke about today, it's your phone. My phone lasted 8 days. Okay, it lasted 2 days, it's a miracle. 3, 4, every day is a bigger miracle. So Hillel says every day add another candle. What is Shammai's thinking? Why would you ever want to decrease? Shammai says, at what point was the oil most miraculous? On the first day, because it had 8 days in it. Now, we didn't know that. On the second day, the oil was a little less, it only had 7 days left, 6 days left, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. One of the great life lessons of Hanukkah that we take away is we love light. We were talking about this morning in shul. As we're all familiar, darkness sells a lot better than light. The person who's predicting doom and gloom, the person who's critical and cynical, that person has got many more followers on their Twitter than the person who's talking about light. But our job is to bring light. Our job is to bring light. And as the Alter Rebbe quotes the phrase, a little light dispels a lot of darkness. It can never be so dark that light will not dispel at least a little bit of that darkness. And last night we lit 2 candles. Beautiful. Mahadran, Mina Mahadran, which is like super duper. I mean, it's a super high level. We talk about this in every mitzvah, that you can get a beautiful pair of tefillin, you can get a very beautiful pair of tefillin. You could get a beautiful mezuzah, you could get them very beautiful, esrog and so on. But on Hanukkah, we are shooting for a 3rd level. Beautiful on top of beautiful, not just better, best, and so on. And what does it teach us? that as much as I've done should prompt me to do more. Not us, because we're perfect, but people that we know who aren't so perfect like us have a tendency to say, look how much I've done. Now I'm not doing anything more. We want to say, look how much I've done. I should be prompted to do more. In material things, we shouldn't think about what we don't have. We should think about people who have less than us. But in spiritual things, we shouldn't think about how much we've done. We should think about people who've done so much more. So every night we have to add light. That's our mission. Our job is to add light. It's hard because, like I said, negativity sells, and negativity, you're not a realist, and you're a namby-pamby, and you're a Pollyanna, and it's the end of the world, and so on. And look, you can certainly back that up, but that's not our message. Our message is light. And as much light as we have, we should bring more light and more light and more light. All right. I wish everybody a Freilich and Chanukah.